Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're going to be doing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, but we're not here to talk about the DE10 Nano today. We're here to talk about the DE25 Standard Edition from Tarasic, because we talked about this maybe 3 or so months ago when Tarasic was talking about the board, but it now has pricing, a little more information out there on the overall specs. And I want to be very clear about something. There is no guarantee that the DE25 in a standard or nano variant is going to become MiSTer FPGA 2. It is a prospective board, but there's a lot of prospective boards out there, but I know you guys love talking about future hardware, so that's exactly what I do today. But I don't want anyone to leave this video thinking the MiSTer 2 has been announced or that it is going to be using this board. It is all just kind of going over the potentials because one of the lead developers of the MiSTer FPGA project is involved with Tarasic on the DE25 review side of things. When we talk about the DE25 standard, we're still kind of waiting for a nano variant like we see here. Now this is the MiSTer Pi. It is a clone of the Tarasic DE10 Nanos, the shots I had in my archive, but the big difference between the DE25 and the DE10 is going to be the switch out of the FPGA chip. We're going to go from that Altera Cyclone 5 to an Altera Agilex 5, and just if you're wondering why I'm not saying Intel spun off Altera a little bit ago, so they are their own company now, but it still seems like Intel has a pretty big holding stake in that. Doesn't really matter for the video, just in case you were wondering. So now Tarasic has announced the pricing for the DE25 Standard Development Education Kit, and you're going to see it's coming in right around $586 or $415 for the academic pricing, which luckily I could get if we were buying this board, but honestly this is probably not MiSTer 2, because don't forget the Tarasic DE10 has the Nano after it, and that's what you're using for MiSTer FPGA. There is a Tarasic DE10 standard, so we're probably waiting to see this board cut down into a lower end variant just on its functions, but not the FPGA chip. It would have basically the same thing. This is in addition to Taki Udon talking about the Agilex 5 and developing his own engineering boards that he could possibly send out to developers for a potential MiSTer 2 as well. So you can see there's a lot of irons in the fire, and the fire is starting to heat up a little bit. And even though the actual uplift of the Agilex 5 on the DE25 standard is only 28,000 logic elements extra, remember logic elements aren't the end all be all of what happens when you're actually using the FPGA chip. A lot of memory bandwidth in addition on this chip would definitely benefit some of the cores that can have a little bit of an issue, like the Nintendo 64 core, and having extra logic on top of that wouldn't hurt either. Do not think that this means that you're going to be playing a GameCube FPGA core or a PlayStation 2 FPGA core anytime soon on this hardware. Honestly, the FPGA chip that could provide something like that may exist out there, but it's probably going to be a $15,000 to $20,000 part on the board compared to something like a MiSTer FPGA, MiSTer FPGA 2, which has to come in at consumer console pricing if you actually want anyone to actually adopt that. And again, with Agilex 5, there are a ton of different things that are going on under the hood, even if you only have in this variant 28,000 extra logic elements. Think of it like this. Think of it as CPU generations. You could have a CPU from 2019 and you could have one from 2025, and they could basically be within 100 megahertz on the turbo clock speed, but the architecture is different, and those modern CPUs are going to get a lot better performance than the old ones. It's not just down to clock speed, it's not just down to logic elements. Things like memory bandwidth, the ability for the FPGA fabric to run faster on Agilex and on Cyclone 5 will all benefit developers in the long run. And if you look at the DE25 page from Tarasic, you'll see here the 6 people they chose to review it, and I'm sure none of those faces are going to look familiar, but maybe one of the names is going to sound familiar at least, and that is going to be Alexei, the founder and author of the MiSTer open source project, notated on the Tarasic site in and of itself. Obviously, Tarasic has a relationship with the people behind something like the MiSTer, so that is a good thing, and I'm just impressed he can wear a white suit. If I tried that, I'd have it stained in about 8 seconds flat. If we take a look at the overall footprint of the exact FPGA chip that's going to be on the DE25 standard and would also be on the DE25 Nano, it really isn't anything that you need to worry too much about on how it functions, but you're going to see, just like the Cyclone 5, you're going to have the FPGA portion of it. You're also going to have the ARM cores, 2 of them in fact at this point in time, and they are going to be upclocked and newer cores, but it's just going to basically function the exact same way that you remember. This chip doesn't really do anything quote-unquote new, but it does everything new at the same time, which is just to say it is a more impressive piece of silicon that developers could get more out of. And you will see here on the specs you get 138,000 logic elements, which again isn't the biggest boost compared to MiSTer FPGA's approximate 110,000 elements, but it is a nice uplift, and honestly a little bit more logic won't hurt anyone. That could mean improvements to cores or giving them extra features that couldn't fit in the footprint of the DE10 just because the logic was getting a little bit too full. And you'll see here on the FPGA side as well, it talks about the RAM and also sorts of other specs that I won't get too involved in because honestly a lot of them are just kind of obscurities. The one thing I will say that will be a bummer to some people is going to be it only has HDMI 1.4 out, and that means it's going to be a 1080p spec. Not sure if Jurassic doesn't have the license or not for something like a 4K HDMI port, because you do need to get a license from the HDMI consortium to actually put these things on devices. So if MiSTer 2 does go the route of the DE25, you might want to keep a 4K scaler around like the More 4K from Pixel Effects or the RetroTink 4K from Mike Chi, because it's going to be a 1080p console, which might disappoint some people. But again, we're just talking about specs here. We have no idea if this is technically going to be MiSTer 2. I just know you guys love hearing about it. And you'll see on the HPS side as well, you're going to get 1GB of DDR4 RAM with a 32-bit data bus. And one of the issues with MiSTer FPGA can be some of the memory access timings and latency. So having a faster access chip there with a little bit more memory bandwidth would not be a bad thing. And if we take a look at the DigiKey ordering page, you're going to see that it's a dual ARM Cortex A55 as well as a dual ARM Cortex A76. Those are going to be improved, more modern processors on the ARM side of things than we have on the Jurassic DE10 Nano when it comes to the Cyclone 5 chip, and that will matter. And if these ARM cores sound at all familiar, that's because you're going to see them in almost every single handheld emulation device. Now, obviously, the ARM cores are not what's running the cores on actual MiSTer FPGA. That's on the FPGA side of things, but it is a very familiar architecture, and basically every software emulator out there in the handheld variant is going to use those Cortex cores in some way, shape, or form. So you would just be getting better CPU cores on MiSTer FPGA, and those often get utilized for OS level things and other under the hood items that have nothing to do with actually playing the games, but it does allow for more overhead in the overall architecture. And again, more power is not a bad thing. If you ask Jeremy Clarkson, speed and power are the two things that make you get through life successfully. And if you take a look at Intel's own page here on the exact same part, you'll see the different caches, the L1 and L2 caches, and the data for those. Again, it's not something that you're really going to correlate into playing games, but it is important specs. And as far as the A76 core, it is a nice part. Now, this is a 3000 megahertz variant that was tested. That's not the speed you're going to see on something like the DE25 Nano with that Agilex 5 chip, but it is a well-known CPU core, so working with it wouldn't be hard whatsoever for developers, and that is definitely something you want because Agilex 5 is still relatively new, and it will be interesting to see how this could affect gaming performance moving forward when it comes to different FPGA gaming projects. If we take a look at something like the Nintendo 64 core, there are a few games that exhibit slight differences compared to original hardware, and I believe that's just down to some of the memory timings and how many cycles it takes for information to be accessed and reported back, because there is a little bit of a tiny bottleneck on the overall memory side of things. So that's why you see on Nintendo 64 some slight variations, but I'm sure Robert FPGA Zoomspas, given a DE25, could probably fix that up relatively quickly. Does this mean you're going to be playing something like Dreamcast on a DE25 Nano or a MiSTer FPGA 2? Honestly, I really do not know. Sure, there's extra logic elements there, but there's only 28,000 of them, and I really have no idea how many logic elements it would take to fit the footprint of an entire Dreamcast, and I'm pretty sure no one could actually give you that answer until they actually sit down and start working on it. Obviously, there's a lot of very creative and talented developers on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, so if it could be done, I'm sure somebody could figure it out, but honestly, at a certain point in time, it really is a 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bucket scenario. You can't fit more than the FPGA actually allows. But it'll be interesting to see what Taki Udon does with this concept as well, because he also talked to his partners at Altera and basically decided that he could maybe make something like this himself, and that would definitely be interesting because he's clearly proven he can get the cost down lower than even Jurassic can, so it allows for the MiSTer FPGA and a potential MiSTer FPGA 2 to see a bigger audience for a lower cost. And he's talking about the 138,000 logic element chip all the way to the mid 650,000 logic element chips, and it would be interesting to see if you could basically take that concept and maybe hit something in the 250 to 300,000 logic element range to give something like this more overhead. But we now know the DE25 standard's exact specifications. We also know what Jurassic is asking for the price, and you can tell from Alexi's involvement something is going on here. But we're just going to really have to wait and see because it is just conjecture at this point in time. But if there's one thing I know you love, it's thinking about the future when it comes to FPGA gaming. So maybe in 2026, maybe in 2027, you might see some movement on this front. But honestly, if you're sitting on the fence wondering if you should buy MiSTer FPGA this year or not, you probably should have bought one last week because trust me, it's some of the most fun in gaming you can have. Short of that, we're done. Leave me a comment down below and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.